Good evening and welcome to the City of Helena Administrative Meeting, September 17, 2020, 5 p.m. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in this unprecedented time. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary during the meeting. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. I would like to make the following remarks regarding tonight's meeting. In order to maintain decorum, I will ask you to abide by a few meeting guidelines. We understand this topic is emotional for many. However, I ask that you be respectful of the commission, the panelists, and all participants. Any use of profanity or hostile language is unacceptable. You will be asked to refrain from using any such language or you will be removed from the webinar. Further, I ask you to be respectful of the many who wish to speak on this topic. If you would like to provide public commentary, you may do so either by typing in the question and answer feature or by raising your hand. If you are participating by telephone, you may raise your hand by pressing *9 and mute or unmute yourself by using *6. You will be called upon to speak by myself or the clerk of the commission in order. Please keep your comments brief. You'll be given exactly 2 minutes to speak. The City of Helena is committed to accepting all public commentary and question posed during the discussion. However, addressing every statement during this meeting may not occur. Madam Clerk, this meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk, would you do the roll call, please?
City Attorney Joden. Actually, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, City Attorney Joden is not here. Interim City Manager Reed.
Here.
Commissioner Halliday. I do not see Commissioner Halliday quite yet, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Commissioner Dean.
Here.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here. Do we have any commission comments or questions before we begin with the department presentation? Madam Manager, would you take it off? Department presentation of Helena Police Department policies and procedures.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I will turn it straight over to Chief Hagan.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission.
Good evening, Chief.
I'm going to screen share if I can here. Give me just 1 second. You will notice tonight there is a slight change in some of the slides. It's only in the background and not in the content. When the conversion was made from PowerPoint to PDF, I lost some of the colors and the words bled out. So I changed some of the backgrounds. The content has not changed. I'm going to start this meeting like I started the last one. I'm going to read the Helena Police Department mission statement. We are dedicated to providing our community with professional law enforcement services through equitable enforcement of the law, continued professional development, and respect for the needs of our citizens. We remain committed to the protection of human rights and focused upon making Helena a safe place to live and work. We have recently moved our policies so they're accessible online. Recently, we've had a lot of folks requesting policies and asking if we could put them online. So we did some work and have all of our policies online. I've included the link here. And we are, as you know, we are working towards more updated, comprehensive, and detailed policy manuals. Our last full revision of our policies was in 2001. We've done updates periodically on an as-needed basis per policies, per individual policies. and that's also based on staff availability to do those. Policies are very labor intensive to keep up. We have to do updates periodically because of changes in the law, changes in case law, and there's always best practices coming out. As you're aware, the city manager's fiscal year 21 budget includes funding for policy services for the Helena Police Department. Last week, I was contacted by Montana Municipal Interlocal Authority, MMIA, and they have a pilot project going with, or they're looking at a pilot project with Lexipol, and Helena has been selected as one of those pilot cities. They would provide the basic service to the police department for the updated policies through Lexipol for a year. And that's going to be voted on by MMIA on October 7th. If it's approved, it'll have approximately $22,000, $22,000 to $25,000 savings for the city of Helena if we decide to go with that Lexipol policy product. So we're looking at that. Very excited that MMIA is also looking at whether or not they should provide policy services to all of their members. Our use of force policies are policies. There's an overall use of force, an aerosol spray, which is OC or pepper spray. There's an expandable baton, and there's a restraints and taser. Firearms falls under the overall use of policy or use of force policy. Under our policy,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Chief, but I just wanted to see, I'm not seeing a share screen, but
okay.
Follow along, I guess, on the attachment, but I wasn't sure if we should be seeing something on the screen.
Let me try it again. I might have got ahead of myself. Is that better?
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Thank
I got
you.
ahead of myself. I thought I clicked that button on the share screen. I did not. Thank you very much. So our use of force in our policy, any use of force by an officer requires a written policy. And what that means is anything beyond a mere handcuffing or escort of someone requires a written report. So hands-on, OC, any of those kind of things. Included in that is if we point our firearm at someone, if we threaten to use our taser on someone unless they comply, those kind of things require written uses of force reports. There's also a use of force form, and that is in Guardian tracking. That's a system we've kind of used to track officer performance. So we've included the use of force form. We've developed our own, and we started that about 5 years ago or 4 years ago, and that's allowed us to track, to include races of suspects, races of officers, what occurred on the event, and those kind of things. Our policies follow state law. Montana Code Annotated 45.3.101 through 115 covers uses of force, justifiable uses of force, and with very few exceptions, Montana statute applies the same law to law enforcement as it applies to regular citizens. We also follow U.S. case law. The one that governs all uses of force is Graham versus Connor, and that is the objective reasonableness standard, and that basically is an officer at the scene can use as much force as objectively reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances. And the objective reasonableness standard is based upon a reasonable officer and what they would have known at the time. And it also takes into account three very important factors. And one of those factors is what's the threat to the officer or citizen. Another factor is what's the crime that the person's being taken into custody for. And the last one is the suspect actively fleeing or resisting. And that's a case law of the United States Supreme Court from 1989. In Tennessee versus Gardner. That is the U.S. case law that governs the use of deadly force. And that's from a case in 1985 where an officer shot an individual in a burglary. And in that case ruling, deadly force can only be used now when an officer reasonably believes that force is necessary to prevent the use of unlawful deadly force against the officer or citizen. And it also has a caveat in there that the officer, if feasible, must issue a warning before that shot is fired. I think my screen just locked up. Let me see if I can. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm having a few technical difficulties. Our policy also has a requirement that officers intervene if they observe an officer using excessive force. It also requires a warning before using force that includes the use of a taser and or a firearm, and that is if it's reasonable to do so. It restricts shooting at moving or from moving vehicles. In 2017, an order was put out to all officers that prohibits various holds that apply pressure to the neck, and that's commonly referred to as a chokehold or carotid artery hold. And that's any technique that's used to try to restrict the flow of blood or oxygen to the person. And so it prohibits the use of force that would apply pressure to the neck. We also have a body-worn camera policy. Body cameras is commonly how that's referred to. That program started in 2015 with a grant from the Highway Traffic Safety Program. That purchased cameras for most of the officers on the street, and the department picked up the difference. We are now on our second generation of cameras. Our current cameras also function as microphone for our in-car cameras. All of our patrol vehicles have in-car cameras. Those in-car cameras are activated. They can be activated manually by the officer or by the lights, turning on the emergency lights. If an officer turns on the emergency lights, it turns on the in-car camera. It also turns on the body camera. The body camera is issued to all patrol officers, and there are also body cameras available for detectives to use. The body-worn camera policy requires the body-worn camera to be activated during investigative public contacts of a patrol officer. The camera has record after the fact capability. This feature has no audio. I'll try to explain this the best I can. That camera when it's turned on and it's not recording, it has a continual loop that is recording. So if an officer forgets to turn on the camera or happens to be walking out the building and something happens before they get a chance to turn it on, that is recorded without audio. Once they push the button, a 30-second recording before they push the button is there, and then the audio starts immediately upon the pushing of the button, and from that point forward, it's all recorded on audio. The videos that are not flagged as evidence in a case will be system deleted after 90 days. That's what we have in our policy. Sometimes it's longer than 90 days, but it's at least 90 days. That's something we worked out with the city attorney's office and the county attorney's office, and it's in there's no real records retention policy on this in the state of Montana. However, we all believe that was a reasonable amount of time based on the amount of video and the length of time and amount of storage we would need. Officers are able to access their video, but they are not able to alter or delete it. And all of our video is uploaded to local Helena Police Department servers. There are two. There's one at our dispatch center and one at the police department. They are redundant servers, so if one of them crashes, we should still have our information somewhere else. And they are 42 terabyte servers. Our internal complaint investigation process, we follow the same basic procedures for complaints started inside or outside the agency. So we'll have officers that do file complaints on other officers, or we have citizens that'll file complaints. They're handled basically the same. Involved officers are required under statute to answer questions for administrative investigations. Discipline can be taken if they refuse to answer questions during an administrative investigation. If we suspect an officer could be charged or is being investigated for criminal activity, we contact the Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigations, and request they do a investigation. That way it is an outside agency conducting that. I'm going to back up. We also do that for officer-involved shootings, even if we don't suspect criminal action. Internal investigations continuing. We can take complaints from citizens in person, in writing, or over the phone. They can be taken anonymously, or a person can file them anonymously or in the third person. So if someone witnesses something, they believe that the officer was outside of the law or outside of our policy, but they weren't involved in the incident, they can report that. Our investigations are generally completed within 30 days, and the complainant is generally contacted with the results. Discipline. The Helena Police Department follows the city policy on discipline. This includes violation of the law, violation of department, or city policy. The city manager has the final decision in any adverse action. In this case, she has the final decision in administrative leave with pay or suspension with pay. An adverse action would be any termination, suspension, or reduction in rank. The city policy is the director, in this case the chief, initiates an adverse action or administrative leave with pay or suspension. I would complete a request or a recommendation in writing to the city manager for approval via the human rights or the human resources director. There are due process requirements for all the adverse actions. The due process steps must be followed prior to taking the adverse action according to policy. If adverse action is taken against an officer, the officer has the right to appeal to the police commission, and that's under Montana statute. Police commission is appointed by the mayor. It's 3 members. The Helena Police Commission is 3 members. They have authority to sustain, modify, or overrule any disciplinary action. The police commission decision can be appealed to district court. Administrative leave, again, we follow city policy to meet the requirements of due process. Some of the things that we could place someone on administrative leave for until the due process is followed would be an officer-involved shooting, a death involving a citizen where an officer was involved, a critical incident that an officer was involved in, or a misconduct investigation. Predictive tools. The Helena Police Department does not have or use any predictive tools or other analytics to prevent or respond to any crimes. Criteria for a traffic stop or any type of stop, whether it's a person or a vehicle. A peace officer may stop a person or vehicle that's observed in circumstances that create a particularized suspicion that a person or occupant of the vehicle has or is about to commit an offense. Particularized suspicion, the easiest way to define that is a reasonable police officer in those circumstances, based on the totality of those circumstances, would they believe a crime has or is about to be committed. Our policy restates the law as listed above. And each time an officer makes a stop on a vehicle or a person, a record is created through a dispatch log or a call for service. Criteria for an arrest. I'll cover the first area with arrest with a warrant. Warrants are all issued by the court. They can be from a violation of court process, failure to appear, failure to follow order of the court, revocation of a suspended sentence, etc. It can be for a new crime where a complaint has been filed. They can be for misdemeanors in state, for any jurisdiction within the state. However, there must be a stipulation that the entering agency will pick up the arrestee. So let's use Great Falls for an example. If they enter a warrant, but say they will not come and pick them up from Helena, we will not make that arrest. And out-of-state warrants, we only pick up out-of-state warrants if it's for a felony. And again, there needs to be an agreement and a verification the warrant is valid and that the out-of-state entity will extradite the violator. Anytime an officer is able to arrest a person without a warrant, they may also issue a notice to appear. This most frequently occurs in misdemeanors. And if a person fails to appear on that notice to appear that the officer issues, the court may issue a warrant, and that would be a misdemeanor for failure to appear. Arrest can be made when an officer has probable cause to believe a person is or has committed an offense, and existing circumstances require an immediate arrest. So for misdemeanors, we generally do not arrest for any non-violent offense. We do not arrest. We arrest for DUIs. We arrest for partner, family member assault, and we arrest for orders of protection and no contact order violations. And under state statute, the preferred response in a partner, family member assault investigation when there's injury to the victim, the use of a weapon, the violation of a restraining order, or imminent danger to a victim, the preferred response is arrest. The reason behind that is because of the substantial risk to a victim if the person is cited and released. If we investigate a partner family member assault that has occurred several days earlier, we may issue a citation. We have to take into account the above statement that existing circumstances require an immediate arrest. We have to look at what's the risk to the victim. That's what we look at in all misdemeanor arrests. Our policy on arrest restates state law. Our policy and state law also covers persons that are exempt from arrest. Electors going to and from attendance at election, except for treason and breach of peace. Senators and state representatives during session of state legislature and going to and from, except for felonies and breach of peace. Militia at attendance of muster and elections, except felonies, treason, or breach of peace. Judges, attorneys, clerks, sheriffs, and other court officers while attending court and going to and from court. Our policy also covers arrest of foreign nationals. This is not in state law. This is, there's various compacts that cover this. So our policy covers arrest of foreign nationals. We notify the arrestee. They have the right to have a counselor notified. In some cases, the nearest counselor official must be notified. There's certain countries that require notification. The one that comes up to the top of my head is China, and our nearest counselor for that would be in Seattle. That's the only one I've had to make a notification on, so that's why it comes to the top of my head. State law also indicates misdemeanor arrests cannot be made at night at the arrestee's residence for an offense that occurred at some other time or place. The exception to this is for partner family member assault and warrants that are initialed for a night service exception. And our policy details that the officer is responsible for the in-custody subjects, and that's both for safety of that subject and the security. Our criteria for search, our officers are guided by federal and state law, along with department policies. The basic rule is a search without a warrant is presumed to be invalid. Some of the exceptions to the search warrant rule, and are covered in policy is abandoned or lost property. Montana has some exceptions that aren't in the federal case law, but are in Montana case law. One of them is garbage. Property is deemed to be abandoned if it's placed in the garbage. Under Montana statute, you need particularized suspicion in order to search someone's garbage. And the other exception under Montana, we don't deal with the garbage one very much, thank God, but we deal with the found wallet and found purse very frequently. And that one basically states if we find a wallet or a purse or someone turns that in, we can only search that wallet or purse until we find an identifying feature. Then we can use that identifying feature to return the wallet to the person. We cannot search the purse or wallet or whatever it happens to be any further once we determine who the owner is. There's a plain view exception both in Montana case law and federal case law. Plain view basically is the officer must believe, must have probable cause to believe that what they're looking at is contraband or evidence. The officer must be in a place they're lawfully justified to be in order to view that item. So if they're unlawfully in an area, the plain view exception does not apply. Montana also has case law that has plain feel. So an officer is conducting a search under a Terry stop and feels something they know to be contraband, they can remove that item from person's outer clothing. Montana has a stop and frisk statute, or commonly referred to in federal case law as a Terry frisk. And the Montana law is 45-5401. It allows for a pat down of weapons when an officer has made an investigative stop. And they can only pat down for weapons when they have a reasonable and articulable suspicion that the person possesses a weapon and is an immediate danger to the officer or the public. Another exception is a consent search. Our policy requires either written or video documentation of a consent search. If that consent is done by a patrol officer, there should be video documentation because of the body-worn camera policy. Another exception to the search warrant rule is search incident to an arrest. So an officer can search for weapons after they make an arrest. They can search the person or the immediate area for fruits or evidence of the crime the person has committed that they're being arrested for. This is another exception in Montana statute. Under federal law, they can search for fruits and evidence of any crime. In Montana statute, only evidence for the crime in which they are being arrested. And possible means of escape. So a handcuff key or a toothpick or a pick or something like that. Those are the things you can search for incident to an arrest. And exigency, and that is basically an emergency situation. If we were to be called to a house for a domestic violence situation and we hear a person screaming and the person refuses, no one will open the door, we can force our way into that because of the safety of the people inside. The other exception under exigency is destruction of evidence. So if we were at a residence, knocked on the door, saw somebody destroying evidence, we would be able to enter under the exigent circumstances. Some of the laws that officers of the Helena Police Department investigate and enforce, mostly what we enforce is Montana Code, and primarily that's the 45 Code and the 61 Code. So the 45 Code is criminal offenses, and the 61 Code is traffic offenses. We also enforce Helena ordinances, primarily Chapter 5 and Chapter 8. And we do not enforce federal laws. If we have what we believe to be a violation of federal law, we refer those to different federal agencies. Some of the most enforced or investigated and enforced criminal offenses are assault and related offenses. So domestic, misdemeanor assaults, assault with weapons, those kind of things. Sexual crimes, thefts and related charges, criminal mischief, that would be the destruction of another's property, to include what's commonly referred to as vandalism. Trespass, obstructing a police officer, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and dangerous drug offenses. The most investigated and enforced traffic offenses are expired registration, no liability insurance, speeding, careless driving, DUI, license violations, no license, suspended or revoked driver's license, signal and light violations, stop signs, traffic lights. We also enforce equipment violations, but we generally do not write citations for those. Investigated and enforced city ordinances. The ones that the police department investigates the most are parking, and our complaints are, all of our parking complaints are complaint driven, so a citizen would need to call those in unless there's an obvious violation where someone's parked in the, say they're parked blocking the roadway or things like that. Abandoned vehicles is a very common one that falls under the parking statute. And with abandoned vehicles, there's other related parking charges sometimes. Open container of alcohol in a public place. Social host, that is when a person hosts a party that has underage drinking at it. So if a person has a party and there's people under the age of 21, they should have reasonably known that there were people under 21 there, they would be cited under the city code violation for social hosts. Distracted driving, which is use of a handheld device while driving, and animal calls. And that ends my presentation, but I am available for questions.
Thank you, Chief, and thanks for the informative presentation. I'm sure all of us learned a thing or two just now. Any comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Commissioner.
I have 5 questions. They're brief though, so I think you'll be able to answer
You're
them.
not allowed to
quickly.
ask 6.
They'll go quick, I promise.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So the first one, I was wondering, how often has the duty to intervene come into play in Helena?
I know of at least 3 times. And the duty to intervene can be as simple as saying, putting your hand on the officer's shoulder if he seems like he's getting escalated, and say, I got this, go ahead, step back. I had one when I was field training, and it wasn't a use of force. It was an officer who clearly had a problem with the individual he was dealing with. I told him, go sit in the car, I'll take this. So duty to intervene right now is more focused on the use of force, but that is very much the stat or the case law is it's any constitutional violation that we witness. I would also expect any officer to get involved if they witness an officer doing something, treating a citizen with disrespect.
Okay, great. The other one was, so on the camera slides, I was curious, it says that they're on with the investigative public contacts, and I'm wondering, like, what does that include? So is it just getting pulled over, or, you know, if you're walking downtown and, you know, you get stopped for whatever?
So that's some of it. But if we were to get called on you had a theft from your vehicle, if we had a call that your dog was at large and we had to talk to you, if we respond to a domestic violence situation, all of those we do. And so we basically, anytime it's a public contact, we have the cameras on.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. My other question was, actually you answered that one. So the other one, do we have data on how many citizen complaints, like say in a given year, or any trends that we can look at from that process?
I could get you those numbers. We had, I can give them to you for the last 5 years. We have, before that, we filed them all on paper. There was no requirement under law to do any of this. We started, I don't remember back when we started, it was many years ago, but we just filled out the paper and put it in a file, pulled it in a file. And about 5 years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to start actually being able to gather that data to include race of the suspects, race of the officers, and things like that. I have that, but it's very cumbersome data, and I have to break it down into categories, and I can do that. And I can tell you some numbers, and I can get some real rough numbers probably as early as tomorrow, but I didn't want to give you numbers without real detail. I was able to get it by race, and that's all I focused on for the last presentation was use of force by race. But I can break it down by what type of weapon. I'm sorry, I'm going on a different tangent. So use of force is separate, sorry. The complaints are completely separate. I don't mean to confuse the two, which I just did. But yes, I can get you those numbers fairly quickly if we need to.
No, that's okay. I'm just thinking that's probably something we'd want to make sure that our data points we can include when we look at new data systems and data collection management. And then my last question is, who is currently on the police commission?
There are 3 board members. One of them is Karen Bryson. One of them is Derek Van Lucian, and the other one is Claire Swain.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief.
You bet. Do you have any other comments or questions from the commission?
Mayor, I have a few questions.
Please go ahead, Commissioner.
So thank you again, Chief, for this information. It's really helpful. I know that during our past presentation, when you provided a lot of the data on use of force, we had a little bit more specifics of what that looked like by race. One question I had, it sounds like you all are including in reporting the threat of use of force or pointing a firearm. Did we receive that data as well, or would that have been a separate category?
My last focus was just the overall use of force and broken down by race. I can break it down, each item, each weapon, all of those kind of things in a more detailed report to you.
Those numbers that we got for use of force would include an instance where someone pointed their firearm at someone?
That's correct.
Okay. So that was included more or less in.
Yeah, everything, all uses of force were included in that. And like I said, if we threaten to use our taser on someone or we point our firearm at someone, we must do a use of force form. So those are included in that.
And then another question I had, and I know you shared some policies and I had a chance to kind of look at them, but I'm just curious. I know one of the things that has come up is just sort of the standard or the requirement of de-escalation. Or I think alternatively, there's been discussions about exhausting all other options. And I'm just curious about your feedback on that. The extent to which our policies are really clear about exhausting all other options before any type of escalation. If you have thoughts on that.
We do not have in our policy de-escalation. It's something we are training on now and going to continue to train on, but I do believe it needs to be in our future policies. The discussion about exhaust all other means needs to be a much more in-depth discussion about what that actually means, to break down what the intent of that is. Because if you get, I'm just going to use an extreme example, exhaust other means on an active shooter situation where people are actively being killed, means you slow down and do other things, which I've read some of the other department policies that have exhaust all means. And the one caveat most of them have is if possible, if reasonable, if under the totality of the circumstances. And I think that is critically important to stay in there because we cannot list every circumstance that force needs to be used. And if we delay it, especially in a active shooter type situation, and again, I know that's the extreme, it could cause more harm than good. But I do agree that we need to have the de-escalation and that needs to be considered in any use of force policy, along with a very in-depth discussion on what exhaust all other means before the use of force means.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know in a lot of other policies, there is also discussion about, the use of force that is proportional, right, to what the scenario requires, and like some really helpful examples of what, various levels of force. So I definitely hear you on that. And I think that there's maybe some models out there.
Can I address that with what
Sure.
that is specific, what that's commonly referred to? That's a use of force continuum. We did have a use of force continuum in our policy, and I don't know how long ago that was. A lot of the experts and model policies said get away from that. I recently looked at the Philadelphia one. I think that's not a bad one. They do have you have to be very careful to say in a use of force continuum that if the person does this, you can do this, because just because you can does not necessarily mean you want to. And that was part of the issue, not here, but in major cities. Well, I'm justified in using this force, I should use this force. That's absolutely what we don't want to have. We want to have officers also making very reasonable decisions, even though they are justified in using more force. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to address the use of force continuum, because that's part of the discussion around the nation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then Mayor, I think two more questions potentially. While we're on kind of this discussion about potential changes, I am just curious about the materials that you shared on the prohibition of the use of chokeholds, whether or not there is merit to clearly articulating that in the policy somehow, if you have thoughts on that.
It will be in policy. So what we do is we send out orders when we don't have, and I don't, this is going to sound bad, but we don't have the immediate resources to get it into policy. Okay. We send out the order. And if you're wondering, has it been sent out since 2017? It has. But we absolutely will get that into policy. I think that should be a much part of the much bigger discussion on policies. But yes, that should be in there. Okay.
And then I was just curious, looking at the stops and arrest numbers, I guess particularly arrests, do those numbers include instances, and I don't know how frequently this happens, but when a person is taken into custody, but not officially arrested, but taken into custody for questioning, is that also data that you all track?
I can't think of any circumstances where we would take some. Are you talking just like physically removing them from the scene, or like if we respond and we handcuff them and then realize they are not that suspect? We hardly ever remove anyone from the scene for questioning.
Okay.
If there are circumstances, but it's rare. It's very rare. I can't say how we would be able to collect that with our current data system.
Okay. And then on just searches and things like, say, a Terry frisk, do you also keep track of the number of searches? Is there data available for that? And I'm just kind of curious, particularly if you have it disaggregated by race.
We do not have data. And we don't, I don't know of a mechanism we have in place that would collect that. That would be, I think that should be part of the discussion that we have at the data collection. If we know what data the citizens and commission want, I think that should be very much included in future records management systems and computer-aided dispatching systems.
Great. Thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner and Chief. Any other comments from the commission?
Mayor?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Hagan, for your time and the work that you've put toward this and the information presented here today. It's, as always, very helpful. So relative to the use of force, reports are generated or written, and you said they're reviewed by whom, and are all of them reviewed?
All of them are reviewed by a supervisor and approved by a supervisor. So that the supervisor that's on shift, and then they are reviewed at a second level. The use of force forms are reviewed at a second level by one of the commanders.
Okay, thank you. No discipline in your collective bargaining agreement, or no discipline clause or language?
There is grievance, but I immediately go to the human resources when we're working this, because where any item is not covered under the collective bargaining agreement, it goes back to state or city policy. There are some grievance policies in there, but there's not a lot of specific discipline in there.
Okay, thank you. Last question would be, is for those that serve on the police commission, are there criteria or standards associated with, somebody that would like to serve?
I don't know. I think there might be a policy somewhere in the city on it. There is a handbook, but the only interaction I generally have with the police commission is they have to approve by law all hiring. And I don't know of any standards, but there probably are in Montana code.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You bet. Any other comments from the commission? Okay. At this time, we will entertain public comments. Is there anyone from the public wishes to address the commission? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, at this time I have one attendee with their hand raised, and that would be Jay Weiner.
Okay, go ahead, Jay.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I just wanted to express my appreciation to you and to Chief Hagan for this discussion tonight. I think moving through these policies and procedures is really helpful background information as we continue to look at policing in Helena and where we want to go with it. So I just want to thank you all for your time and dedication.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Madam Clerk, do you have any other raised hand?
Mr. Mayor, I have Dennison Rivera.
Go ahead, Dennison.
Yeah, I just want to thank Chief Hagan for all the hard work he's doing there. I know it's a huge task to be able to bring up all the information and all the being able to educate us on what's happening, what are the policy procedures, and I hope for the best outcome for you and to stay strong. And I appreciate what's happening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, I have no other hands raised. Oh, I spoke too soon. I apologize.
That's okay.
RyAnn Christman.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. My name is RyAnn Christman. I'm a county resident. I do have a son that attends Helena High School, so I feel I have a completely vital reason to listen and participate in the city commission meetings regarding the police department and the SROs of our schools. And I wanted to thank you guys for providing the Zoom capability for the public to participate. But I guess I'm curious as to why you guys aren't meeting in person. From what I've seen in the pre-COVID meetings, it seems that there's a lot of room for social distancing for you all to be in the same room. And it just seems that it would just make sense for you all to meet in person without the public and have the public be able to view the meetings. It would kind of steer the direction of wondering if possibly there are some other messages and questions being prompted to some commissioners while you're in the meetings. And I just request that you guys start meeting in person and provide that Zoom meeting for the public, but that you meet in person. And that's all. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ryan. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, I have Eric Seidle.
Go ahead, Eric.
Hello, Commission. Hello, Chief Hagan. How's it going?
Good.
I just had a question. I was curious if you would be able to clarify the stop and frisk procedure that you mentioned, and also if you'd be able to clarify. I believe you said an officer could pull someone over for suspecting a future crime. Would you be able to clarify both of those things, please?
Mayor, do you want me to answer those?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So the state statute says is, has, or about to commit a crime. That's what the state statute says. And it basically, if you thought someone was breaking into a car, they haven't yet committed the crime, you could stop them and basically prevent them from committing the crime. And the stop and frisk procedure is also under state law. And it basically, it ties the stop in and the frisk in. That's all under one statute. So if an officer has particularized suspicion to make the stop, they can search the person if they have an articulable suspicion that the person is armed and presents a danger to the officer or the citizen at that time.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor.
Madam Clerk?
I have no other hands raised.
Thank you. Chief, we want to thank you for your presentation. It was informative and well received.
Thank you, Mayor. And I imagine you guys are getting tired of listening to me.
Hey, we're bringing it on ourselves. Come on.
I always enjoy this, but I'm glad to move to the next phase.
All right. Well, I don't think we have any directions to give to the city manager. Do we have any final comments from the commission? Do we have any final comments from the commission? Well, Chief, again, I said thank you. And at this time, this meeting is adjourned.